Well, last presentation, in the last session, and so many people are here. I'm amazed. Really makes me very, very happy. I thought I would have a small group and a personalized contact. So let me just quickly introduce myself. I'm Arie Kai-Browne. I'm from the University of Applied Sciences in Berlin. And I'm actually a field archaeologist, but currently employed in the Department of Game Design. In game design itself, or our departments, field archaeology and game design, we have a cooperation since about 10 years now, mainly due to how to deal with 3D data. So it actually all started with this particularly this project, but with Aleppo. We were there in 2010, shortly before the Civil War started. And one of the issues was that in preparation for building a museum on top of the archaeological site, we wanted to do some 3D scanning. The site itself is, of course, fairly exceptional and so on and so forth. But what we have here is a fairly complex situation. So that means we have this temple from the early Bronze Age to the early Iron Age. And all these phases, Middle Bronze Age, Late Bronze Age, all those are reflected within the actual architecture of this temple. So if we just take a look, you can see here, this is the main cellar of the temple. We have the entrance area coming into here. And the temple itself is decorated with these relief decorations depicting different gods and deities of the Hittite world. And what's interesting here is that some elements, for example, you see underneath here, these stones, that was originally actually the first temple in the early Bronze Age, which after it burned down was then rebuilt. And later in the later phases, they just reused these, originally the walls, but then they just use it as a foundation. And that has some relevance, and I'll come back to that a little bit later. Furthermore, the whole orientation of the temple also changed over time. So originally, for the first phase, when we came into the temple, one had the main axis, these reliefs weren't there yet. And what you can see behind here is a big cult niche. So you had an oversized, according to the text in Ebla, so oversized deity sitting there. So when you come inside, you immediately see this huge god. And to the Hittites themselves, they at a certain point said like, oh, this is actually not a good idea, because if somebody unclean comes into the temple and he immediately sees the god, it ruins everything. So that's why they then closed up the back part and made a like this orientation. So you first have to come inside the temple, turn around the corner before you see actually the main central scene of the temple itself, with the weather god depicted here. To a later time, when the Hittite Empire broke apart and there were a lot of small states, the Luvians came and did something that actually would have been absolutely, the King Taita put himself next to the weather god. And it's actually really interesting because even here, in the way the different figures are depicted, you can see also the development in the art history. So for example, the weather god itself from the Middle Bronze Age has completely different proportions of the body than the King Taita, which, as I said, reflects the different phases of the temple itself. So, as I've mentioned before, we can see here we have a lot of things going on. And of course, for visitors or other people from outside, understanding these relationships and the development of the temple is not as easy. Especially if one just stands there and explains, that's one thing. But of course, you know, the current situation in Syria doesn't even allow us to be there. Now it's getting better. I'll touch on that also a little bit later. So anyway, we were there shortly before a museum was supposed to be built like right on top. So everything was supposed to be left in situ, which actually is the perfect situation we could have had. The funding was given, the World Monuments Fund said, okay, we'll even pay for that. So we were, of course, very happy. And we went then on site just in preparation and did different types of 3D scannings. On the one hand, we used for the general situation, typical terrestrial laser scanner. And in addition to that, we did some close range scanning of all the relief decorations. And so we had this wonderful data set. Here you can see just a rendered image out of Blender, 130 million polygons. And that was one of the points where we thought, okay, we don't even know how to handle this data. And then the game designers came and brought in their game design magic. As I said, that's also another thing I'll touch on soon. So for us now, of course, we are in a very lucky situation. We have all these really very high resolution, high quality 3D scans, and especially now with the situation, my professor has been on site already, so he knows how it looks, and it's not as bad as it could be, but of course it could also be a lot better. And we were then wondering, okay, what are the possibilities? So of course, we can do our conservation work and so on. And we recently had a very fortunate opportunity. There was an exhibition in the Museum for Islamic Art in Doha. And they had an exhibition on the topic Syria Matters. And we were able to print the original scene in a 1-to-1 scale. So that means 3 meters by 2 meters by 50 centimeters, 2.5 tons. And it was shipped then from Berlin to Doha. It's of course always nice to see when the financial situation permits something like that. One of the problems, of course, that we have now here is that the temple or the central scene itself is completely taken away from its actual context. So, of course, the visitor sees the art history and the inscriptions and things like that, but of course doesn't really understand where this relief comes from. So we were having, our thought was, okay, especially with the modern development, everybody has smartphones, especially in Doha, everybody has 3 smartphones. It's easy to just give them an app where they can just have the central scene and then the additional information of the temple. Some of the issues that, of course, arise there is we're not modeling. We're not reconstructing. We're not modeling the polygons ourselves, but we're using like these high-resolution 3D documentations. And so we, of course, have this huge amount of data. And there are certain ways where we can reduce data. I don't want to go into details about it, where we can reduce data while maintaining the high fidelity of the details, which especially is important for interactive relighting, for example. So we had somebody mention it already, that the light situation from the room is being emulated on your smartphone, so it doesn't have a feeling it's kind of ripped apart, but it's connected with each other. So we did that. We can see here a comparison just between the high resolution model and the real-time capable model, so which we can really work with. If you look at the file sizes from 18 million polygons down to 20,000, 1.8 gigabytes to a couple megabytes. We did that for the entire temple. And so you can see here, it's a screenshot from Unity 3D, where we can interactively now engage with this temple. That's been actually a project we've been working on for quite a while now, with the main focus actually on virtual reality, developing a toolbox for actually working with the data. So not just visualizing the data, but also developing different standard tools for archaeologists to actually really do something with the data. Measure, relight the inscriptions, see the stratigraphic combinations between the different phases, and so on and so forth. So for us now, with the object in the museum, we thought, of course, it would be great if we could combine also our previous work with the current situation on site. So, of course, our main framework is based on Unity. And for Unity, there are, of course, a lot of different plugins for AR work. We already heard today about Vuvoria. Just recently, Google with its AR Core, I think. Yeah, AR Core from Google and AR Kit from Apple made a, I don't want to say big impact, but they have some quite good things going on. And there are certain features that for us are of particular interest, because if we're in a museum, we don't necessarily want to plaster everything with some markers so that the marker is detected, because that's kind of takes a little bit away from the object itself. So luckily enough, some of these plugins also offer 3D object tracking. So it's SLAM-based, simultaneous localization and mapping, where one can just do 3D, like a type of 3D scan from the object itself. It recognizes certain features, so similar to the structure for motion. Certain image features are recognized, the model is being reconstructed, and that serves as a basis for the localization of the 3D model within your tablet or your smartphone. Of course, that's the one thing, to being able to look at it. And we're now currently working on implementing actually two versions. One version will be for the more general public, so of course with descriptive character, saying, okay, for example, here we can now see only the early Bronze Age structures, or one switches to the next, now one can see the development to the Middle Bronze Age. Now it's the Late Bronze Age where this is not visible anymore, and in the early Iron Age, actually just a couple of the reliefs were exchanged. That's the one part. Of course, it's a lot about UI design, how to really have the public to engage with that kind of data, how complex you want to have the information. So which kind of target audience do you want to approach? But on the other hand, we are currently also porting a lot of our tools that we developed for virtual reality to augmented reality. So for example, we have within our Unity environment a database, CouchDB, where information can be accessed. Something maybe more interesting, because it was already mentioned with Stellarium, we implemented a stellar constellation. So based on the geographic location and the time, one can then project certain vectors within the temple, which in this case was actually especially relevant because on site we noticed that the early Bronze Age, the layout of the foundation of the original wall deviated 2.5 degrees from the later layout. So there's a 2.5 degrees difference. And our question was, okay, the people, they knew how to build. So it's not like somebody sometimes survey errors happen, we all know it. But in this case, we were then even able to prove with the Stellarium that the deviation of the 2.5 degrees was based on the change of the star alignment over a period of 500 years. And this was able then to we're able to correlate that. So our next steps, and I hope for the paper this will be done, is to have the possibility of also using these kind of tools within the augmented reality environment. For example, just to input your data, have it projected onto the site, and have fun with it. With that, thank you very much.